I actually think that decision making is probably a little bit overrated as kind of a question in that, or an area of study, in that investors, obviously, this is their job, right? And that's kind of all they can do in some sense, invest or not. And, fine if they're, certain kinds of investors get to actually help the companies they invest in. And so they have kind of other levers at the disposal, but kind of in some simplified model, it's like, do you click the button or not? Do you pull a lever or not? I actually think that kind of in our lives, things rarely have that character. Sometimes you have a true binary decision, right? Like, do I go to this college or that college? Do I take this job offer or not? And it's a sort of an investing or investment-like decision, but it's not usually that. And I think that the kind of the question I would sort of encourage people to kind of think more about is, how do I get to make better decisions? As in, how do I make sure that the decisions I'm confronted with end up being better? It's not like, how should I choose between option A and B, but how do I make sure that both options A and B are as good as possible? And there's also C, D, and E, and that those options are great too. And that's about sort of how do you explore the space to make sure that you sort of just to kind of return to maybe the example we just mentioned, it's like, do I go to this college or that college? There's also a C there, which is, well, should I go to college? Or it's, should I become a doctor or a dentist? But maybe the answer is that you should become a biochemist. And so the way I find myself in conversations with people is sort of really trying to push them. It's less on sort of how do you make a decision and more about how do you jolt yourself out of the kind of particular kind of furrows that you're in and realize the possibility space and the world is just so much bigger than perhaps people are thinking about it. And it's it happens to all of us. It happens to me. The kind of your horizons narrow, you get stuck in your existing models, you kind of get used to conceiving of the world and the options in front of you in a particular way. And it's more about how do you repeatedly pull yourself out of that.
How do you do that? Are there questions you ask? Are there any?
I think certain people are great at this. Like, I have a friend, Michael Nielsen. And
what was the last name?
Nielsen, Nielsen, and he's just exceptionally good at sort of, you're sort of, thinking, well, should I go up or down? And he's just great at sort of pointing out all the different ways in which you could go sideways. And it's like, you're sort of living in flatland on this kind of two-dimensional plane, and he points out maybe you could go up. And so I guess the best ways that I found are sort of particular people who just sort of seem to think laterally, and kind of, I guess in my head, they're kind of thinking sideways. And I think the second best way is exposing yourself to kind of more perspective and ideas, in all the ways we've kind of already discussed. But I think finding the people who just think a bit divergently, the returns are really high. And I think having that sort of little board of directors around you, that's kind of an imperfect analogy, because it's not like there's a specific set for me. I kind of tend to go to different kinds of people for different kinds of issues. And it's not like they actually have any formal power, obviously, but just kind of that notion of there being these sources of perspective that are quite different to you. I think that's just really very powerful. I think valuing those people and building those relationships really pays off.
Mm-hmm.